Thank you, Mr. President. I was speaking about the Maugean skate before the break, and I was about to note the Australian Government Conservation Advice released just last week on the 6th of September, which on page 2 in its summary said this: the primary threat to the species is degraded water quality, in particular substantially reduced levels of dissolved oxygen throughout Macquarie Harbour. There is a significant correlation between the reduction in dissolved oxygen levels and increases in salmonid aquaculture due to the bacterial degradation of organic material introduced into the water column from fish feed and fish waste. Mr. President, in the Australian Government Conservation Advice, the key urgent action identified is this, and I quote, increasing the levels of dissolved oxygen in Macquarie Harbour via a reduction in salmonid aquaculture organic loads and or utilisation of mechanical/engineering environmental remediation technologies. So it's very clear the federal intervention comes at a critical moment when marine farming and environmental licences for finfish farming in Macquarie Harbour expire on the 30th of November of this year. Time is critical for this species. Early intervention is almost behind us. We need science-based management strategies implemented immediately with urgency. Reductions in biomass made a number of years ago now, after what had been a massive ramp-up, I might say, that had caused the previous crisis in the harbour that the member for Murchison referred to. The reductions made since then have not done enough to improve the situation. Clearly, they need to go much further and not renew these licences to operate until the harbour has had a chance to recover. And the Maugean skate has had an opportunity to be saved from extinction. Urgent, decisive action is needed, or this government and the salmon industry will go down in history for having caused the extinction of a Tasmanian species. If the Maugean skate is driven to extinction in Macquarie Harbour, with salmon farming operations clearly identified as the key driver of that extinction, this industry will never again be able to lay claim to being sustainable, in my view. Sustainable means that you can remediate the impact that's been caused. You can't remediate extinction, Mr. President. Mr. President, in the area of environmental impact, another aspect I want to touch on is the impact on our freshwater systems in this state. Again, in our LegCo finfish inquiry, this area was considered, and I'm going to note here recommendation 44 from that inquiry, which was conduct an independent review of the impacts of current finfish operations on inland waters, including drinking water supplies and remediation costs borne by Taswater and the state government. Recommendation 45, which was require all new freshwater finfish hatcheries/smolt production facilities to utilise recirculating aquaculture systems. Recommendation 46 was publicly release monitoring data relating to the operation of freshwater finfish operations. Mr. President, to my knowledge, some of these have been partially progressed in some sense, but others not. Concerns continue to be raised about the impact of the salmon industry on our freshwater systems throughout the state. While we are introducing more RAS systems, those recirculating aquaculture systems, which is very positive, we do still, though, have existing flow-through hatcheries continuing to be a problem in the state and no expressed intention to remove them all or change them over to RAS systems. We haven't had, in recent times, to my knowledge, a comprehensive statewide assessment of the state of our rivers in this state, in Tasmania. And similarly, we know we've now gone 14 years without a State of the Environment report. This government has ignored the statutory requirement to produce a State of the Environment report twice, in 2014 and again in 2019. Now we have apparently one finally being progressed to be delivered next year. The gap, of course, Mr. President, that's caused by this kind of failure by government to meet statutory responsibilities to produce important scientific data and monitoring contributes to the likelihood that environmental impacts and concerns relating to industries such as the salmon industry will not be appropriately understood and documented and acted on. We currently have fresh public concerns now being raised about potential public health disasters in our drinking water catchment areas, with possible links being identified between rising rates of motor neuron disease, The link between algal blooms and MND is becoming more discussed and examined, and we'll be watching that keenly, given our situation here, Mr President, where Hobart's drinking water supply is affected by pollution from salmon hatcheries in the catchment areas and by the now notorious Jenkins composting facility. That facility is a dumping ground located on a Derwent River tributary where, among other wastes, hundreds of thousands of salmon corpses that routinely die in their salmon cages are left then to rot in that facility, further polluting Hobart's drinking water. I also note this summer there's a predicted supermarine heatwave, which will almost certainly see potentially millions of caged salmon slowly suffocating to death. Their bodies will presumably need to be disposed of and perhaps dumped at this self-same site by the side of our drinking water catchment, further polluting it. Mr President, not enough is being done to monitor, to document, to respond to the impact of the salmon industry on our freshwater systems in this state. And on the matter of environmental protections, we know the government is progressing a new set of standards, environmental standards relating to this industry. However, I do note the Tasmanian Independent Science Council made a submission to the draft environmental standards when they were put out for comment, which expressed serious concerns that those draft standards appear to provide less environmental protection and less clarity than the existing environmental licence conditions. The Science Council has also published a one-page summary outlining key issues around this, and the issues include significant extensions of allowable impact, extending from the 35-metre boundary at this present time to possibly 135 metres. Key emissions such as stocking densities, fallowing and dissolved nitrogen outputs, different standards for current and future operations, multiple associated standards and guidelines that are being developed in similar timeframes and that interplay together but make it unclear how those various standards will now be applied by the EPA and other regulatory bodies. There's a lack of transparency, the Science Council says, around the development of this standard. No regular reporting, public reporting period, no opportunity for third-party appeals. So, Mr President, there's much more that could be said on matters relating to environmental impact of the salmon industry, which is one reason why I believe any balanced discussion of this industry cannot exclude consideration of environmental impact. Certainly, any credible and comprehensive cost-benefit analysis would include this as an essential element to it. Mr President, to conclude, we know the best interests of our state are not and will not in the future be served by sycophantic pandering by government and regulators to huge corporate interests. Those corporate interests will always have the upper hand over community interests when it comes to trying to influence government policy and the regulatory environment. Regular community members, for example, can't afford $4,000 tickets to attend dinners with ministers and premiers. Nor can a community match the availability to the salmon industry, for example, of a cashed-up, slick public relations body to promote and lobby on behalf of that industry and produce documents such as this lovely brochure. Mr President, there should be no corporate industry in this state that receives government support at any cost. We are a state that should have the confidence, creativity and entrepreneurship matched with our outstanding natural assets to put us on the front foot when negotiating and setting the parameters for corporate investment in Tasmania. Too often, it appears, we kowtow to corporate interests and much too readily trade off protection of our environment and social values in the belief that we will otherwise miss out on investments being made here and the opportunity for jobs and economic growth. However, we also know that the powerhouse industries of our state, such as tourism, are based squarely on those self-same natural assets we are too readily trading away. I understand, Mr President, that any industry will want to promote its own interests and will seek to influence government policy and regulation and shape community perceptions. Such is the nature of those industries. However, it's my view that they at least should have the integrity to do so on the basis of factual, accurate, transparent information and data. That is not what I believe has been produced by the salmon industry in Tasmania in this brochure we have before us. And as we are noting in the motion, this is not transparent. It cannot be verified as accurate, and that's a shame. Mr. President, in terms of the motion before us, as I said earlier, I am not able to support it. I can note the economic analysis provided by Deloitte Access Economics report that was dated 2020 regarding the Tasmanian salmon industry and the Salmon Tasmania brochure, which is derived from it, but only with the clarification that the Deloitte document is not in the public domain and its full details are not able to be tested, that neither of those, the Deloitte background paper or the brochure produced by Salmon Tasmania, neither are comprehensive cost-benefit analysis of the industry's impact on the state, and both contain contested data and claims. I can acknowledge the Tasmanian salmon industry is a social and economic contributor to Tasmania, as are many other key industries. However, the Tasmanian salmon industry is also a contentious industry in this state, especially in relation to the environmental damage it causes in public waterways and coastlines. So given that, with the specific wording of this motion, I'm not able to support it, but I do appreciate the opportunity that the member has provided for us to discuss this industry, because I do believe that the more open and transparent discussion that we have based on verifiable, accountable, open and transparent data is important and does help us potentially track a way forward where we can reduce the level of contention that surrounds the industry in the state and deliver best outcomes, not just social, not just economic, but also environmental, all three, for our Tasmanian community.